Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Lisa Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are delighted to welcome Charlotte Tollitt, a mortgage broker from Meet Margo, to talk all things mortgages and divorce. So thank you so much, Charlotte, for coming along to the podcast today and talking to us. Do you want to start by just providing our listeners with a bit of background and information on you?
Yeah, of course. So thank you very much for inviting me today. I am been a mortgage advisor for the last 10 years now. First couple of years within the banks and then a broker for the rest of it. So working alongside all different lenders, helping all different types of clients. I'm currently working through Meet Margo at this moment in time. So we're a startup on a mission. We're trying to break down the barriers people are facing when it comes to home ownership. We're dedicating to helping women, in tricky situations as well, providing with that help and support. We're trying to simplify the process, make things easier. And our aim is to give great mortgage advice and it's accessible to everybody. So we don't believe in charging fees, we're fee free. We just want to make sure that everybody is accessible to that great mortgage advice.
Great. Well, I think this is going to be really useful for people because, I don't know about you, Lisa, but I always think it's for most people, that either what am I doing with my house or how can I buy a new house is going to be your sort of number one consideration if you're going through a divorce. I think that's probably fair, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what everyone's mind goes to in most cases. So hopefully there'll be some really good advice and some practical tips about what we can do here, and we can get into all sorts of things about interest rate changes and things like that people might be interested in. So recording this in November 24, and there's been a recent base rate change, so doubtless we can come onto that as well. So let's start off with, I think, let's kind of take it chronologically. So if you're about to go through a relationship breakdown or you're going through it, the starting point about a joint mortgage, let's assume it's a joint mortgage in both parties' names. One of the first questions that people have to us is, oh gosh, we're maybe a bit financially stretched. We need to keep paying the mortgage. How can we do that? And maybe Lisa, you can talk about how we can do that. But Charlotte, when you talk to people about the consequences of what happens if you don't pay your mortgage, that's what people are really worried about on day one.
Yeah. So it's when it comes down to your mortgages, whether it's a joint asset, isn't it? So you took that out, the joint liability together.
Yeah.
So a lot of people think upon separation is, do we still need to pay the mortgage? Because even though you're separated, unfortunately, the mortgage doesn't. You need to go about sorting that out, so then you can separate and go your financially separate ways as well. Now, if it was to be a case if the mortgage wasn't, one party has moved out and they don't feel like they're liable to then pay towards the mortgage anymore, unfortunately, they are still liable, but it can cause a lot of financial stress and strain if, a couple are to break down, living in the property and say, one had to move out, living in rented or, living with family situation. By not making those mortgage payments, it can cause such a detriment, to your credit file moving forward, which can harm you when you go to buy your next home, when you have come to a resolution and separated and the property's been sold. There's two options. You can either sell the property, and go buy a solo, or you can, refinance and buy the other party out. But the main concern really is really important to reiterate it to clients as well, is that have that discussion early doors. If you are thinking of separating, the mortgage is really important. It's still a joint liability and you're both still liable for that. And the consequences that it can have if one party doesn't pay towards that, it can really affect them moving forward.
And when we talk about joint liability, I think getting to the sort of techie legal point, it's the parties, if it's a joint mortgage, they'll be jointly and severally liable. So we often get the questions, do I pay half? If someone stops paying the mortgage, what's a bank going to do? Are they going to go after one person, go after both of them? Does everyone have to pay 50-50? Does someone pay the whole thing? Can you talk through that?
Yeah, of course. So they actually both liable for the debt 100%. So everybody thinks, it's 50-50, but that's what we kind of agree, behind the scenes. Some couples can have different setups. It might be one earns more than the other. Would that continue with it? When they split, would one still continue to pay more than the other financially? What's affordable? If you was to miss the mortgage payments, then a lender would come for both. They wouldn't be asking for 50% either, from each party. They would be asking for 100% from both parties. So behind the scenes, that's where the agreement comes in, finding that resolution of who pays what, but the bank will just see that, and the mortgage lender, as we want 100% of that payment, regardless of what the share is behind the scenes.
And that's something we'll deal with a lot, Lisa. So what are you saying to clients when they are saying to you, well, I'm moving out and I can afford to pay towards a mortgage, I can't, I shouldn't, why do I have to? When you have all those discussions, how does that normally go when you're trying to sort out things on an interim basis?
I think this is where the interim period is so difficult, isn't it? Because finances become so strained, and either you're remaining in the property together, which has its own issues, if you like, perhaps emotionally, or you're separating, and then suddenly we're having to fund two separate houses, whether it be the owned family home and also rental property elsewhere, but not necessarily having any additional money coming in. So I think the starting point is that where possible, we try and keep the status quo. So whatever was happening during the marriage, as far as finances are concerned, sort of in this interim period, that would be the ideal. But sometimes there just isn't enough money in the pot. And it's a case of having a look at both parties' schedules of outgoing. So we would ask both parties to sit down and plot out what it is that they need to meet their immediate needs. So we're not looking at holiday budgets. We're not looking at long-term financial planning. What is it that in this interim period you need each month to be able to meet the outgoings? And then we would look at both parties' income and we would see whether there was enough money there to cover it. What obviously becomes really, really difficult is if there isn't enough money there to cover it. Now, if it's a case that one party actually does have the funds, but they're just choosing not to contribute to, let's say, the family home because they've moved out and they just don't want to, then there are things that can be done, such as applications for interim maintenance to the court so that the judge can have a look and the judge can make orders for interim payments if necessary. But it is really difficult if there's not enough money there. And my advice would always be that in those circumstances, they need to speak to the mortgage lender and see what options are available, whether that's payment holidays, whether that's transferring in the interim period to interest only. What options do you suggest in those circumstances, Charlotte?
So we would advise the same. The first protocol would be to go directly, to the mortgage lender. We can look at it as a whole and break down, for affordability, especially if one partner was looking to buy out the other, for refinance aspect of that, around the affordability, the single income buying power as well, to make sure it is affordable, in that sole applicant's name. I think that then breaks down, it gives a clearer picture, of what the possibilities are, whether to stay in the home or to sell. If it is, like you say, in that interim period, it is so difficult, isn't it? The best thing to do is to go to the lender first of all, and would always advise them to do so, because if there is a risk of any missed payments, then they have, specialised financial planning in place. They haven't had in previous years, it's kind of a case if they wanted the money, but this is now highlighted. It's becoming more and more, something that everybody is experiencing. So the banks and lenders have got these set up financial planning aspects in place to, like I say, interest only options, holiday payments, so they can kind of prepare for that rather than it getting full on mortgage default as in that interim period until a resolution is reached.
Yeah, I think my experience of clients speaking to lenders about this is they tend to be pretty amenable, don't they? They tend to be kind of quite, I don't know if warm to it's the right phrase, but they would certainly rather know that there's going to be an issue, try and avoid an issue, rather than having to suddenly start threatening repossession proceedings, which they don't really want to do. And I think there's normally a bit of fear about people saying to their mortgage company, I'm struggling a bit. But I found that most lenders are pretty reassuring. Is that fair, or am I looking at it a bit too optimistically?
No, I'd say they're definitely fair. They want to put measures in place. The last thing they want to do is to repossess the property as such. They want to do everything in their power to help you before it gets to that stage. It's not in their interest to do so. So they have put a lot of measures in place, and they are a lot warmer and kind of towards that than they have been in previous years.
Are there any issues if one party wants to, let's say, move the mortgage to interest only, but the other party's not in agreement? Is this something they both have to agree to?
I think it will need to be an agreement to both of them, yes. So if they are not having, communication from, one party, if they're reaching out and they are communicating with one that is as such, it's all down to their discretion, and it will have to be signed off by the lender. But they are open, to different options. It's all circumstance depending really, and what communication they've had with both parties.
I think we've mostly been talking about joint mortgages so far, which are the most common that we see. But I think a particularly tricky one that we sometimes see with the interim basis is if the mortgage is in the sole name of one person, and especially if they move out. The typical kind of gender approach with this is it might be in the husband's sole name, but he might move out because the wife's staying at home with the kids, and then you can sometimes get into a bit of argument about, well, the husband's got to pay the mortgage because it's in his sole name, and he's got to pay for somewhere else to live. And sometimes, the person selling the property, the wife might not be that keen to pay towards the mortgage. That's a tricky one, isn't it, Lisa? And that can, because as Charlotte, as you said, it's the lender's going to come off the person on the mortgage, and where it's just one person, it's got to be that party. So that is an extra complexity, isn't it, with the interim finances, Lisa?
Yeah, it is. It's really tricky, isn't it? And as I said, I think we're living in a cost of living crisis at the moment. Money is tight for everybody. And I think the extra difficulty that you've got there is that obviously if one party is not paying and they're not named on the mortgage, it's not impacting their credit rating. So they're kind of a bit like, I don't really care. And if it's not a particularly great divorce, if it's quite acrimonious, actually they might quite like the fact that it's impacting the other party. And the reality there is, I suppose, that sometimes there isn't enough money to go around, and the mortgage may well go into default because they might not be able to pay all of it and pay their rental elsewhere. And I suppose in those circumstances, that person's priority might be the rental payments that they're paying on the property that they're then living in. But that creates a whole host of problems, doesn't it, Matt?
Yeah, hugely. It can really store stuff up, and then you get into arguments about who should, paying the mortgage and child maintenance payments against that, and what should be payable and what shouldn't. So it can be a really tricky situation. I think maybe what would be helpful in terms of, let's look at the next stage in the process, and you're starting to sort your finances and looking at what the final resolution might be. And you've already referenced, Charlotte, that, is there going to be a sale? Is one person going to buy out another's interest? I wonder if it's worth explaining what actually buying out someone's interest in the property means, and how you can do that. And let's work on the basis that it's a joint mortgage. So, right, me and Lisa, we've got a house together, joint mortgage, and who's buying who out, Lisa? Do you want to buy me out, or am I buying you out? Let's do this.
I'll have the house. It's fine, Matt.
You'll have the house. That's very generous of you. So, right. So Lisa's going to buy me out, and she's a far better negotiator than me. So she's managed to get a great deal because I'm soft. How would Lisa buy me out of the property? How does that work?
Okay, so what we'd need to do is refinancing the property as such, so we remortgage the property. So the first thing we need to do is have a look at how much the house is worth, so the value of your home. You then need to work out what equity is in there. So if you was to sell your property, you need to base it on, if we was to sell this property and repay the mortgage, what money is left over, after the sale. Depending, like I say, if it's 50-50 set up in this situation, you would take that 50% share of equity. That is then your money that you could move on elsewhere and use as a deposit, on a new property. But what you would need to do is, if you are keeping the property, you would need to refinance for the full mortgage amount that stands at this moment in time. You would then need to top up the mortgage by the buyout amount as well, if that the other person's share as such. So we top that up. So this is where the affordability aspect comes into it, because it can be quite tricky when we're staying in the family home. It becomes challenging, one, on the affordability. So we'd have to assess income and outgoings. Is the mortgage plus the additional lending, is that affordable to you? Will a bank sign that off? It's now gone from a joint income to a sole income as well, so we need to make sure that it passes on the affordability. The second aspect of that as well is the monthly cost of it, because it's always okay to say a lender can, lend X amount to you, but whether it's affordable, it's comfortably affordable as a monthly payment. Can you keep that lifestyle that you'd like to, or is it overstretching slightly? You can't afford to do anything else, with a family. And also, is it sustainable, like for a long period of time? What are your plans following separation? Will work need to change? Will circumstances change? There's quite a lot of factors that we need to contribute towards that. And I think when we sit down and give that clearer picture, of whether it is possible and it's affordable, that's where then, whether it's possible and it can be eliminated, or whether it's eliminated and we need to sell the home instead, that's where it would come into it. But it's working out that equity, whether it's affordable in that sole applicant's name, and whether it's sustainable moving forward as well.
When we're looking at affordability, what are the big things that the lenders take into account, and what are things that they're sort of more likely to let slide? And is there anything that somebody could do in the months running up to sort of looking at taking on the mortgage or speaking to you to paint a nicer picture, if you like, of their finances, to give it the best chance possible of getting over the line?
That's right. So income would be, they'd want to see last couple of months' pay slips, if you're in a permanent role as such, or that is if you was employed, or if you were self-employed, we want to see the last 2 years' tax calculations to support that income. Now, with regards to outgoings, anything in your sole name would need to go down. So it's things like car finance, personal loans, outstanding balances on credit cards. So to put yourself in the best financial position, it would be to keep the debt to a minimum. If things could be paid off, that could then mean you would possibly lend, more from a bank or a mortgage lender. They'd also look out for, child maintenance costs. That would need to go down as an outgoing as such as well. Any regular payments that, you're contracted to or, agree to as such, they would need to be involved in that. With letting things slide, it's just looking at, putting everything in the best financial position. If you need to top up income, to support that, a lot of lenders will take extra, overtime payments, commission bonuses. So we will look at everything that we can include to help support you. So if it doesn't pass on basic salary, you could have had bonuses for the last 2 years. So we can look back and we'll try and get every little bit of income in to help support and make that happen for you.
And when, perhaps just to help people to make it absolutely clear, let's put some numbers on this, and we can go through a little bit of an easy peasy worked example. So let's say that mine and Lisa's house is worth 200 grand, and we've got 100 grand left on the mortgage.
Yeah.
Now, what we would actually do is knock off an extra couple percent for cost of sale. Let's ignore that for easy maths purposes here. So that's 100k of equity in the property. And my half share, if there are no other assets and we're doing a sharing approach, and of course there may be other assets, you might be doing a little bit less, my needs might be a bit lower, whatever it may be. But I would get half of that 100k equity, wouldn't I? That would be my lump sum of 50 grand for me in my back pocket. So what Lisa would need to do with her mortgage, unless there's other funds that she can use to produce that 50k, she's going to need a new mortgage, which is the existing 100,000 plus the 50,000 for me. So that's right, isn't it? So it's the affordability assessments that you would do on Lisa would be, can she afford over whatever term it's going to be, at whatever interest rate, looked at monthly affordability, £150,000. So is that about right?
Yeah, that's right. And we can always look at extending terms as well. Depending on interest rates, you've got different options available to you. You can look at extending the term. Say you had a 20-year mortgage, but it's not affordable, just in your name. You might need to take it out a little bit longer. So there's lots of flexibility around that. But that is right. It would need to be the full mortgage balance as it stands, plus the extra, in this case, the extra 50,000. So you'd be looking at remortgaging around the 150 for the buyout.
And with the term, how far can you go with that? Is that to state retirement age? Can you go a bit further? What about pension income? How do those things factor in?
Yeah, so a lot of lenders now, they're a lot more lenient with this. So they say the standard planned retirement age is actually 70 now for banking purposes. So it can go up to age 80 with certain providers as well. So you've got 75, 80. Some lenders want to see proof of pension. Some are happy with you just paying into a pension as such, to see, off pay slips. Mm-hmm. Some might ask for, it depends on your age and how far off retirement you are as well. But a lot of them see the need for that, to take the, especially with the way rates are and the price of everything these days, they are accepting to take the term past for state retirement.
Oh God, we're never going to be able to retire, Matt. We're going to be here forever.
90, 95, 96 with the term needed on my mortgage. Yeah, miserable.
One of the things that sometimes crops up is where, for example, in a settlement, it might be agreed that the house is going to be transferred. And it might be that there's no extra payment that's going across the other side because there's other assets, if you like, that have been factored into the settlement. So it's agreed between the parties, let's say, that the house is going from the husband to the wife. So the house is going to be transferred to the wife. And let's say she has been paying the mortgage, and she's been paying the mortgage since they separated 2 years ago, every single month, but actually her income on paper is not high enough to justify her taking over the mortgage as a whole. Is that something you come across, and are there any workarounds for that?
Yeah, we do tend to see that a lot, and we're having a lot of cases at the moment, where we want to, keep the family home as such. I think when we looked into it and did our research lately, about 46%, I think it is, of divorcing couples, they want, to one of them, and it's mainly the woman who wants to remain in the family home. It's a really difficult one, and it's a grey area, with the bank, because like you say, if the evidence is there that she has been paying the mortgage for the last 2 years, it's we can see why, and it is affordable in our eyes on paper, but for compliance reasons and from banking regulations point of view, they can't, unless there's an appeal process. You can always put forward an appeal where they can look at that, and it'd be down, to the bank's discretion as such of what they would do moving forward. Again, it depends on the situation, what's around, the breakup, if it's toxic, if there's a lot going on behind the scenes. We can kind of explain that and hope and pray they would look at it, from a common sense approach and honour that for the individual. But at this moment in time, there's nothing set in stone, or it would have to be appealed, and it would be down to their discretion.
Quite a lot of clients will say, go and get your mortgage capacity, and we'll explain why. Go and see a broker and all that, or they will just go off on their own volition. They'll come back and they'll have something from their bank, from their lender, which says we can do X, and we will say, maybe try and speak to a broker. Perhaps you could speak to people about, and this is just an absolute plug opportunity, frankly. What can you do? What does Meet Margo do? What's the advantage of using a broker against just going to the Halifax if you're currently with the Halifax?
Yeah, so the main advantage of that is every bank and lender has different criteria and different policies. So they all accept different types of income. So one might accept, your base salary. Others might take average, with bonuses. Some might take it 100%, 50%. Every lender lends different amounts. So even though you have your lending multiples, even the other week I had a difference of nearly £100,000 difference between Barclays and NatWest the other week. So there's such a difference. So you might go to one lender, like you say, and say, oh, right, they can lend X amount, and you would automatically think that'd be the case across the board, but it isn't. So that's where we come in, and that's our knowledge and our power of knowing who accepts what. Someone who will accept child maintenance even though it's not court agreed, that extra bit of income, second jobs, we can look and know where to place a client for the best interest for them and get them that maximum of who's going to cover their home. Again, different ones have got, eligibility wise, credit scoring, if there's been issues. We've got access to over 100 lenders on panel, so we've got plenty of choice to give you that advice and find you the right option.
Moving on to the slightly darker side of things, something that we see probably in increasing amounts, and there's a wider awareness of, is economic abuse. And we've spoken before on the podcast about this topic. There's an episode with Rosie Lyon who talks about economic abuse, her own experience of it, and what she does to counter it. Actually, she works in the banking sector, so it can be a tool. The mortgage payment or otherwise independency or credit ratings can be a tool of economic abuse in domestic abuse situations. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you see around that, and in particular what support there is available for someone if they are being economically abused.
Yes, certainly. So mortgages can be a significant tool when it comes to economic abuse, and we do tend to see this a lot, in toxic situations. One of the main ones that we see is deliberate non-payment. So where one partner might intentionally stop paying the mortgage, causing missed payments, and that's damaging both partners' credit files. This tactic kind of creates a need for further dependency and financial harm moving forward. It stops that person preventing, buying possibly their next home. Because when it goes on the credit file, you might think, it's a couple of missed payments, but it can impact that for quite a long time. It will remain on your credit file for 6 years. And mortgage missed payments, when it comes to taking out another mortgage, can really cause that harm and stress. The next thing that we see a lot of is refusing to the consent of sale, or to allow the other person to buy them out as well. So they need to sell the property to gain, that financial need. A lot of people will need the money from their equity, because not everybody's got, a lot of money sat in savings that can act as a deposit for their next property. By the other person refusing the sale or not allowing them to buy them out, that's trapping the victim into that debt or into an unwanted living situation. I know we've mentioned previously before, if they've been rented, it's the cost of paying towards that mortgage as well as renting if they can't, live within the same property, or living with family and putting that strain on them as well. So there tends to be the two: it's deliberate non-payment or refusing to sell, or for the buyout as such. When it comes to supporting this, I know there's a lot of legal aid out there as well, charities who can help people, in those situations where they are receiving that abuse. We would always advise obtaining legal support, as family law as well, just to their rights, where they stand, what happens next, to give them that clearer picture. Financially as well, we can explore their options. So we can look at how much they can afford, what the best option for them moving forward is. Is it remaining in that family home? Is it to sell? We will give them that financial support. the best thing as well is, like we said, speak to your lender. Look at those, specialised financial planning aspects, whether they can help you, whether they can give you that payment break. I think it's just reaching out and getting support from every aspect where you can, whether it's legally, financially, financial support, friends and family. It's just helping them get through that situation.
And definitely add into that the charity that, going back to Rosie, who I spoke about before, she worked with a charity called Surviving Economic Abuse, who are absolutely fantastic in providing support to people and really understand the really complex dynamics involved. So that's something that people should definitely go to as a first port of call, I would say, along with the other very sensible suggestions that you make. Something else I wanted to talk about, which is completely different, this is really techie, is about the timing of a mortgage capacity assessment. So we've just seen the base rate cut, and every time it comes up for the Bank of England to look at interest base rates, there's discussion in the press about what's going to happen with mortgage rates, the current expectations that the base rate may fall over the next sort of 12 months. Whether that happens or not, who knows? But I guess with some people, they're thinking, well, hang on, if the base rate's about to fall, therefore will mortgage rates fall? Therefore, it's going to be cheaper for me to afford the mortgage in 6 months' time. Should I wait and should I pause? Is there any merit to that? Or is it better just to say, well, you can't predict it. Let's just go and get the situation as is now. And if it changes, can you refresh a mortgage capacity assessment partway through?
You can do. So it's a burning question everybody wants the answer to at the moment, is whether we sit and wait it out, or whether, especially people looking to move or buy out. Now, with the base rate, predictions do say it's going to be a rocky 12, 18 months and then hopefully start to stabilise. So fingers crossed that is the case. And we've seen, last week, that slight reduction. We're hoping that's a trend and it continues to go that way. Now, we always advise, if it's your situation as it stands now and you need, it's in the best interest to buy out or sell or move, or your dream homes come along, we say go with it. If it's comfortably affordable and it's within your remit now, then go for that, because you can reassess it. So with the lending limits changing all the time at the moment, between banks and lenders, as I said, there can be significant differences between each one of them at this moment in time. It does make it tricky for buyers, especially first-time buyers or people moving home or moving on to a new situation with the lending limits, but we can refresh that at any point. So as the lending limits change and the mortgage rates change, we can revisit that at any time. So if you're struggling, in that time to find the right property, within the budget, it could be different if the rates change. So if it's the right thing to do at this moment in time, I'd say yes. If not, you can sit and wait, but it's not guaranteed, is it? It could go either way. There's pros and cons to doing so, waiting around or going for that. But if it's the right thing for you in that moment in time, and we can refresh it as you go along as well. It's not, set in stone. Things do change and we can revisit that at any time.
That's all been really helpful, Charlotte. We like to end the podcast with just some little bite-sized takeaways. So if you could just sort of run through perhaps your 3 top tips, that would be great.
Okay, so top tips would be, is if you are going through a separation, is to have that discussion early doors of what happens moving forward with the mortgage payments. Like I say, is it going to continue with what's been happening, previously within the relationship? I think getting that set in stone and how it's going to continue moving forward whilst you go through the interim period, whilst you reach the resolution, I think that would be number 1, so it doesn't affect, credit moving forward, and where each other stands with that situation. It'd be to get legal advice, of your rights, where you stand, and make a plan moving forward. Obtain financial advice as well, so you know where you stand for your next step, whether that's buying solo, remaining in the family home. We can explore all options and affordability for you, and I think that will just help give a clearer picture. It's less stress and anxiety, especially around the financial aspect of things. It's just reaching out to each individual, whether it's legal, financial, your lender, having discussions as a couple together and making a plan moving forward.
Perfect. So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about the work Charlotte and the Meet Margo team do supporting clients at meetmargo.uk, and follow them on Instagram at Meet Margo. If you would like more information on our podcasts, head over to stowtalks.co.uk, and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.